Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast, a free agent edition, as I provide insight into two new Washington players, William Jackson III and receiver Curtis Samuel. My ESPN colleagues were terrific about them. Ben Beebe from Cincinnati, who covered Jackson, and David Newton from Carolina, who of course covered Samuel. David provides some caution on the Samuel signing, though I do have a different take than him. You can follow Ben on Twitter at Ben_Baby and David at DNewtonESPN. You can read all our work on ESPN.com. We have a free agent tracker on the site for each team, including, of course, Washington, that provides insight and analysis on every signing. It's good stuff, folks, and it helps you learn about Washington and also anyone else you want to know about. Before I share my conversations with Ben and David, a few thoughts as usual. I've talked to more than a few agents the last couple of days, and when I ask about quarterback Ryan Fitzpatrick, their voices light up. Some of these agents have had clients who played with him. They absolutely love him. One agent told me he'd love his guy to play with him. The same agent had told me before, a couple of weeks ago, that he wouldn't want his receiver clients to have anything to do with this quarterback situation. A little bit different now. They know his reputation in the locker room, but it's because of his willingness to throw the ball and spread it around. Of course, the agents don't care about turnovers, wins, or losses. They're worried about receiver stats. That's part of that's the appeal for him. And Fitzpatrick is willing to attack, give guys a chance, and that's what players like. And of course, it's what agents like as well. Whether they win or not with him, I don't know. That's not what they're saying, but I do think the receivers will be happy. I know they like that he's a relatively accurate quarterback, especially in certain areas between 1 and 10 yards, and I'll get to that in a minute. One agent, also an ex-player, told me how fun he thought Washington would be to watch, and that was before it added Samuel. Fitzpatrick ranked 7th last season in average yards gained per dropback. A couple more stats. His percentage of interceptions per pass attempt was 3.0, which was 6th worst in the league, but Alex Smith had the 4th worst last season, typically not in his career, but last season. It's not as if he's going to be bombs away down the field. In fact, he had one of the lower rates of passes 20 yards or more attempted. He attempted just 17 of those in his starts last year. I think it was 7 starts, I think it was. But he also had one of the lowest rates of passes at or behind the line of scrimmage. So the intermediate area, 10 to 19, between 10 and 19 yards, completed 53.9% through 6 of his 8 picks in that area. He's at his best from the line to 10 yards, which is where Samuel does his best work too. Now, I do think that he'll give guys a shot down the field when you have guys that he's comfortable throwing with. You saw that in Tampa a few years ago. And I think if you have some of that here with McLaurin and Cam Sims, I think that's a definite thing as well. Speaking of Sims, and I wasn't going to get into this too much, but I know, they with signing Samuel, and would they draft someone else? Well, they got Antonio Gandy Golden last year. Has to show a lot more, folks. It didn't see enough in training camp. I think he could help as a blocker. I think there's some things you can do because of his size. I think this offense typically requires some big body receivers, but that's why they wanted to bring Cam Sims back. I think they're crossing their fingers on him that what he showed at the end of last year, maybe he could develop into something even a little bit more than that. If not, then you see what Gandy Golden can do, and you also have Kelvin Harmon coming back. Anyways, more on that in another episode. With William Jackson, the consensus of people I talked to was that he was easily an upgrade over Ronald Darby. One assistant coach whose team played against the Bengals said he was an excellent man, good, but not elite. And when you talk elite corners, you're talking top 10, even maybe less than that. I think it's really hard to find a corner. It just is an elite corner and a top corner. Jackson hasn't made a Pro Bowl, been named All-Pro. The latter is elite level. Pro Bowl popularity, All-Pro, sign of the play. It does seem like Cincinnati wasn't convincing him long-term, which is why they signed Trey Waynes to a similar deal last offseason. But Jackson was also coming off a tough year after an injury, so it did make some sense. He is good, though, and anyone I asked about him said exactly that, and that it was an upgrade, and it was a good move for them. Now, I did ask Ben about his ability to play zone because Darby also came here as a man corner and was asked to play a lot of zone. And you saw him maybe struggle with some of that early in the season. Doesn't mean Jackson will, but I saw Darby do that. And I'm not sure that they're going to I don't know if they're going to play a ton more man just because of Jackson. I don't know that. And I don't know that they won't. He may give them some more ability to be creative, though, with man on one side, zone on the other. Man does not suit all the corners here, though I do know that Jimmy Moreland played that in college as well, and I think he'd probably be comfortable with that. But we'll see what happens there. I do think, and you'll hear from Ben about could he fit, how did he fit into his zone, what could he do there? I think sometimes it's a matter of the guy was really good in man, so you're going to use him there, but it wasn't like the Bengals defense was very good either. So I do think they'll still mix it up here, I think. As for Samuel, one key for Washington was seeing how he developed last year. David Newton is a bit skeptical of this arrangement but I think it works because they did see how well he performed in an expanded role and in the slot in particular. They did an analysis of his game. That's what they found. And that was going on without Christian McCaffrey around. When they had him, they had McCaffrey too. So just know that. But David saw how two groups used him. So I wanted to get his insight. And he certainly flourished last season with a different group. One thing I've seen here, and it happened last year too, the coaches in the front office are on the so-called same page. When that's the case, you sign guys while also having a plan for them. Didn't always happen in the past. And that was part of the big problem here, among other things. One last note, people ask about safety trade Boston as a possibility. If they signed him, what I've been told is that they would look at that after the draft, see what you get or don't get in the draft, then reevaluate that spot. Now, I don't know if there's going to be anybody else who they might sign before then, but for Boston in particular, that would be his market most likely. That's another key part of free agency is at that post-draft stuff. That is also true of Ryan Kerrigan. I'm not sure how his market is really developing. He's obviously still unsigned. Some teams I talked to viewed him as a situational guy. He wants to start. I'd be curious to see if the Colts do anything because they could use somebody there. I don't talk to all the teams, so I don't know how everybody views him. I just know that. But the door is not closed on his return here if he's still free after the draft and if the sides can make it work. Anyway, I'll have more on all that in other episodes. After this break, I'll be back with ESPN's David Newton to talk all things Curtis Samuel. Why is he skeptical?
Support for this podcast comes from State Farm. It's no surprise that State Farm is there to help you protect your home or car, but you may be shocked to hear that State Farm offers surprisingly great rates. Yeah, that means you get a dedicated State Farm agent and access to their award-winning app, all at a surprisingly great rate. So if you're hearing my voice right now, State Farm probably has a surprisingly great rate for you. When you want the real deal, like a good neighbor, State Farm is there.
Hey, this is Joel Corey from Inside the Cap. I know you're enjoying the John Conn Report, which gives you insider access to the Washington football team, everything you want to know, which is going on with the Washington football team. Once you're done with that, check out my podcast, Inside the Cap, which gives you the ins and outs of the NFL salary cap and player contract negotiations. Check out these two products and other fine podcasts from Empire Media.
Welcome back. Now here's my conversation with ESPN's David Newton. Well, David, I think you could almost become my co-host here because you're on a lot because of this connection with Carolina and Washington, of course, getting Curtis Samuel. I think people know a little bit of what they're getting because I've heard about him so much, but you've covered him now for a few years. In your estimation, what are they getting?
Well, I mean, my first look at this is they're getting a quality receiver, not a one receiver. I really don't think he's a great fit for that offense unless they change some things up. I was doing a story earlier this year, and an offense like what you have at Carolina, an offense like at New Orleans, Kansas City, where they use his versatility, ability to be a receiver and be a running back, I think that's where he's most valuable. And you saw the Panthers get the most out of him with Joe Brady last year, particularly without Christian McCaffrey. So, I don't think they're going to use him or line him up in the backfield a whole lot at Washington. They may use him on a lot of the sweeps, jet sweeps and things like that. But and he's a super nice guy. He's a guy that can make some big plays, but he really had not done a lot. Injuries and things had kept him back the first few years, and he not done a lot until he got in Joe Brady's offense. In fact, I put on Twitter today that, Joe Brady's biggest production came today when Curtis got $11.5 million average per year. I know that could change when they get the contract, but now the number 3 receiver for the Carolina Panthers, who was their third receiver, is now making more per year than their number 1 and 2. And that's going to change when DJ Moore next year gets a new contract. But really, the Panthers I just never saw them keeping him. They had their focus on putting the franchise tag on Taylor Moton because they needed to build the offensive line. So I really never saw a place for Curtis on this roster.
So you're like the wet blanket for all these people tuning in because they love you because you're always giving good insight on these guys. But I want to follow on that because he was there for a couple of years with this group. And the second year the year that Rivera left, he was starting to blossom more as a receiver based on the stats. How were they using him that year? Because I remember when Washington played him, it did seem like they're using him a lot as a receiver. I think he only had like 19 carries that year, though.
Yeah, it was kind of hot and cold. In fact, from people I've talked to, so they were actually Ron Rivera was thinking about trading him his last year there, but Marty Herney didn't want to trade him, felt he had a valuable commodity in him, and so now all of a sudden both Marty and Ron have got him there in Washington, which is kind of ironic in a lot of ways. But
the funny thing is, like, he wanted to trade for him last year, right?
And again, I think that Curtis is a quality receiver. I just don't think he's a number 1 receiver. And I'm not even sure totally if he's a solid number 2. I think where Carolina played him, where he used the versatile roles and kind of as their number 3 receiver, was really a good fit for him. And that's why I mentioned the teams I did in Kansas City and New Orleans, teams where I thought that they use a lot of the same formations that they do here at Carolina and use the versatility of those guys a lot. So, no, this has nothing bad to say about Curtis. I think he's a great leader in the clubhouse. Matt Rule has talked repeatedly about how he'd love to be able to keep him. Just because of what he brings on the field and his attitude and his work ethic and everything. But again, the money just wasn't there. The Panthers had way too many other needs in wide receiver to try to build their roster to the level they want to get it to.
Well, do you think he got more carries this year because of how they wanted to use him, or because McCaffrey was out and maybe he was able to show and expanded the level of his game?
Well, that's the other thing. A lot of it was because McCaffrey was out. And with McCaffrey expected to be back full this year, a lot of those touches, at least as a running back, are going to disappear. And truthfully, a lot of his catches would disappear too, because when McCaffrey's been there, when he's been healthy, the 2 previous years, he was their leading receiver. And, that would have knocked Curtis down to the 4th receiver in that format. So from that standpoint, I feel like they feel comfortable that they've got enough weapons and they can add another receiver, through a mid-level round pick in the draft that can fill that 3rd or 4th receiver spot.
And I will say, like, they have J.D. McKissick and Antonio Gibson, who both have versatility in the way they would line them up. They would use Gibson in the slot sometimes and get him the ball as a carrier out of the slot. They would line up McKissick a little in different places. So my guess is, and I listen, if they don't tap into that versatility, they're making a mistake, because that's his strength. So I agree with you. If they don't do that, that's a problem. I think they will, but you saw this staff in action. How did he came out of Ohio State as a running back. So how did he improve as a receiver from what you saw?
Well, I mean, he started off as a running back, then they moved him to receiver, and he really played so well there. He never got many touches, a lot more touches as a running back. Again, I talked to his running backs coach last year for a story, and he said he was so good as a receiver that you didn't really have to spend a lot of time with him, at the running back position, because he knew what to do when he got there. And I think receiver is his natural position. He can also return kicks, so you can look at him as a potential guy there, although the Panthers really, because he's always done on the offensive side, have kind of held him back from doing that the last few years. But he's a guy that, again, he's to me, he's McCaffrey light. He's not as dynamic as Christian McCaffrey is as a receiver or as a running back, but he does a lot of the same things that Christian McCaffrey does in terms of being that guy that can play all over the field. I mean, they can line him up at any wide receiver spot and in the backfield. So that'll give them some, I guess, what Ron likes to call, and even Matt Rule here, position flexibility, where you can keep defenses off balance with where you line up the guys. And I think that's a strong point. Again, I just never saw him as being a true number 1. First of all, that's why I didn't think he was going to get the number 1 money. and I guess I consider that number 2 money, what he's got there, but I'm not even sure he's going to fall in that category now. It just depends on how you use him. If you use him the right way, he can be a very, very good weapon.
And I wholeheartedly, like I said, I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think based on conversations, my sense is that they would, but what you think in March doesn't always play out in September, because sometimes you have these plans and you get to the season, you realize, well, you're doing this and this. But I would think they would, because again, that's why you're paying him, is for that. Now, the
only evidence I've got is when Samuel was under Ron here at Carolina, he really didn't flourish as a receiver, and he didn't get that many carries in the backfield.
Right.
He only really flourished when McCaffrey was out and when Joe Brady was putting his offensive scheme to work.
So within that, like, one thing I noticed too is, like, he's obviously a speed guy. He's got really good speed, but he's only getting about 11 yards per catch or so. It wasn't like, so how was he used in terms of using that speed? How did they tap into that more?
Well, I mean, there were times a few years ago when Cam Newton was in and he was struggling a little bit that you would see Samuel get open deep and Cam would just flat out miss him. So he's got that breakaway speed to get deep out there, and I think that's a plus for him. And I think with Fitzpatrick, if he's your starting quarterback, that they can use that to their advantage. Again, he wasn't a guy that was going to break a lot of tackles. He's not like DJ Moore type. That one reason he was the number one receiver was his yards after catch were the most impressive thing about him. So he's not going to be used that way because they don't expect him. But I do think that he can use that speed. He'll tell you probably that he's the fastest guy on the team now, because he always argued that, if they put a track team here at Carolina with the wide receivers, he'd probably be the anchor guy. So, yeah, I think that speed is going to definitely be a plus. It's definitely a plus for any team in the league right now. And you see, because speed does, as they like to say, kill in the NFL. So, but again, he was used more as possession receiver. He's really big this past season on third down. I mean, he became Teddy Bridgewater's like security blanket on third down, and his percentage of completions on third down for first downs, I think, was 1 or 2 in the league.
Yeah, well, and that's why I asked, because like a lot of the stuff that I saw him on, they're underneath stuff. There's underneath routes. It seemed to be the heavy emphasis. And even I think, some of the highlights you'd see him is more underneath, getting able and maybe, getting yards at the catch that way or whatever. But I would, like I said, I think they're going to, well, you're right. They have to use him right. As just as a route runner, how is he classified down there? What did people there say about him?
Yeah, a solid route runner. I don't think, again, he's not in Christian McCaffrey level, maybe not DJ Moore's level here, but I think he's definitely at a class where he can be really effective with that. He was pretty precise with that. His problem his first few years in the league is he had Cam Newton as his quarterback. Cam was going through some inconsistencies because of his accuracy, and a lot of time I guess Curtis would make the plays, be in the right spot, and Cam just didn't get him the balls. So last year was the first time he really was in a system that fit him, with a quarterback that was very accurate, and Teddy Bridgewater that fit him. That's why I said it's got to be a system. And I talked to a lot of people around the league about this, and I think Samuel is more of a system type guy. He's got to be in that right fit. And I'm just not sure, unless Washington does something to change from what I've known Ron Rivera and his offense in the past, I'm just not sure how good of a fit that's going to be.
Well, that's good to know, and we'll keep an eye on it. And I think having Ryan Fitzpatrick, you would think, would help. We'll see. Great insight, David. Appreciate you coming on, and as always, providing my listeners with good insight on this deep, deep connection to Carolina.
I think between you guys and the Bills, there's a lot of Carolina players out there right now. I actually was going through the list of how many Carolina players are on the Washington roster compared to starters from or key players from the last year Ron was here. And there's still more players on the Carolina roster from that year, but it's starting to narrow the gap a little bit.
I think it's the rest of the building is up here. I think that's what it is. It's not as much the players as it is coaches and front office and everybody else. So,
yeah, they've got quality people there. I think the staff is really solid, and I think that Ron will get things turned around up there, and that program will be heading in the right direction. Again, you got to kind of the same boat Carolina is. You got to have that franchise quarterback that can turn things around.
Well, and it sounds like Carolina is desperately looking for one guy right now. So we'll see what happens. David, thanks a lot.
Appreciate it, John.
After this break, I'll be back with ESPN's Ben Baby to talk William Jackson III, where he bounced back in 2020 and why he struggled in 2019. Also, why so few picks.
Microsoft Teams is helping a bicycle company reinvent the way that they work.
We make bicycles for everyday riders. Once the pandemic hit, we started doing virtual visits.
All of a sudden, we could open up our showroom to customers around the world.
Learn more at Microsoft.com/Teams.
Support for this podcast comes from Wild Turkey Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. Let's tune in to their one-on-one with Jamal, a real bartender from Old Fourth Ward in Atlanta.
I really get into the backstory of whatever I'm pouring, out of respect. There are literally years of experience behind these bottles. Wild Turkey, same recipe since 1942. If you want a true classic, this is what you want to order.
Wild Turkey. Wild Turkey Distilling Company, Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. Copyright 2020, Campari American, New York, New York. Never compromise, drink responsibly.
What's up? It's Mike Jones from the Football Jones Podcast. I know you're enjoying your time with the John Keim Report, but once you're done, I want to invite you to come over and check out my podcast. Each week, we take a deep dive into some of the most pressing topics around the NFL. High-profile guests from the coach, player, and front office ranks, as well as the top league insiders. Check out the Football Jones Podcast, another fine product brought to you by Empire Media.
Welcome back. Now here's my conversation with ESPN's Ben Baby. All right, Ben. Well, Washington wanted to bring back Ronald Darby. They couldn't get him, so they go out and get a guy that you're familiar with in William Jackson III. In general, let's start with this. What is Washington getting in him? What's the Jackson package?
William Jackson's a really fast guy, number one. I think he's got elite speed. We saw that when he was in Houston, when he was healthy in Cincinnati. He missed his first year with an injury, and then after that, he's been pretty good. His 2017 year, when you look at the numbers, I mean, they were off the charts. And I think that's whenever he was healthy and when he was on the field, people, when he came back from that injury in 2016 and 2017, he was phenomenal. When you look at the tape, the numbers kind of dropped off over the last couple of years. I think 19 wasn't as good as people would have hoped. And then this year in 20, I thought he had a bounce back season. You saw him make some really good plays. I think one of the big keys was in 2019, he was playing with the torn labrum, kind of the first year in Lou Anarumo's scheme. And now in 2020, fully healthy, no shoulder problems, and was able to, I thought he played with a lot more confidence. You saw him make a lot of plays in one-on-one coverage. And I think that when you anticipated him getting a big deal in free agency, so it makes sense that Washington did what they did in order to get him.
And with this year too, because that was a tough year for that defense. How much was he impacted by that? He's joining a team that has a really good pass rush. How much was he impacted by maybe what else was around him last year, or how much did that factor into his play, good or bad, one way or another?
Well, actually, funny you mentioned that because I think he had a couple things working against him in that defense. Particularly, number one, the pass rush has not been nearly as good as it's needed to be the last couple of years. The Bengals were last in the NFL in pass rush, and as we know, pass rush and pass coverage are intertwined. If one is struggling, the other one is going to also be a problem as well. So, that being said, I think if the Bengals would have been able to get more pass rush, you probably would have seen better numbers from their pass defense. And then number two, the Bengals were without their other top corner, Trey Waynes, for the entire year last season because of a pectoral injury he suffered during training camp. So therefore, it was easy for other opponents to go ahead and just attack the other cornerback. And, especially when it was LaShawn Sims, who I think was one of the worst corners in the league, unfortunately for him, when he was on the field. So by and large, William Jackson was really their only reliable corner who was on the field at all times last season. He had to play a lot of snaps. I think that maybe affected things. But by and large, I thought he played pretty well. Considering what we saw in 2019 compared to what we saw in 20, I thought whenever he was in coverage, when he was in one-on-one, he was able to hold his own, was able to make some plays on deep balls. I thought he was able to track the ball better in the air. And so there's a lot of good things that you saw on tape where you said, okay, if a team was willing to pay him, this is what you're getting. So, you're not maybe getting the 2017 William Jackson, but still, I think you're getting a very solid shutdown corner who's playing very well and who's got some tremendous speed and some really good physical traits.
And, it's funny because when they played Washington, he was all over Terry McLaurin, and they had a nice battle there. And Terry won a couple, but even with some of the ones he won down the field, William was right there. I mean, his coverage was pretty good in that game. Did they play mostly man coverage? Because these guys are going to play zone. They did this. I don't know if they're going to switch or not, because Darby was a man corner when he came here, and they played a lot of zone still. But it sounds like Williams' strength has always been press man. How much did they do with that? How much zone would they mix in there?
They did some exotic things at the beginning of Lou Anarumo's tenure in 2019. And as they got towards the end of 2020, I think they simplified the defense and kept things, they love playing cover two a good amount, which obviously still going to leave you in some underneath stuff where you're playing cover, where you're kind of playing some man underneath and then, releasing up top. And the thing is, I think Williams is going to be able to adapt to both. I think the reason why he's able to play press man so well is because he has that speed. I mean, he's not worried about getting beat. If you're a guy who's able to press and do that successfully, it's because your ability to have that makeup speed on the back end. You're not worried about getting burned. Right. And so I think that's going to be the key thing with him. And so, he's going to be, I think playing zone is going to be something that he's going to be able to adapt to pretty easily, to be quite honest. Being able to, I think it's all about communication at that point, making sure that you're on the same page. And whenever we saw pass breakdowns when the Bengals were in zone coverage last year, it was primarily because, there seemed to be a miscommunication whenever, you were passing off a man from, the corners to the safeties, or the linebackers to the corners to the safeties, or vice versa, or you're playing an inverted cover two, or things of that nature. So, most of the time when we're seeing breakdowns in zone coverage, and it's across the board, it's because there is that miscommunication, or is that struggle, in converting assignments over. So, I think that's going to be the problem. I don't think Williams I think he's going to be able to pick up whatever is thrown at him from that aspect of it. And, and he's still, very young. Obviously, this will be his sixth year in the league. He hasn't really had a lot of injury problems, aside from a couple that we mentioned. So I think that he's still going to be in his physical prime and should be able to do the things he's done well over the years.
How much did he rotate with guys, or would he stick to a side?
We asked them that a ton, and I think that, it depended on the matchup, whether
right, which is way should be good
or not. So I think that, he's been able to do both. If they need him to travel, he'll do so. If not, then he'll stick to one side. But I think by and large, I think it just depends on the defensive coordinator's philosophy on whether you'd rather have a guy playing on one boundary or the other, or you'd rather have them against their best receiver, in what matchup works better.
And then the other thing too that would get pointed out, and I pointed out because it is part of his stats, is he only had 3 picks there. Now, I also know when you play a lot of man, sometimes you're not going to get those opportunities. Zone is where you're going to get a lot of them in a lot of defenses. But how much was that a topic of conversation with him, and what would be maybe some of the explanation for that?
Some of that is probably zone, but I also think that sometimes I think he does need to track the ball a little bit better. I did say he improved in 2020, but I think there's probably some strides to be made in that regard. I think that's definitely the one detriment in his game over the years, is that he hasn't been able to get those interceptions like he did in 17. I think in 2017, let me check my notes here. He ended up with he only had 1 interception. He had 1 interception 19, so 2 total over the course of that span. I think he's around opposing wide receivers enough. He's around the ball enough where he should be able to have a better nose for that. I think that's one thing that he does need to improve on his game. Like you said, not playing enough zone is not, sometimes zone's a little more conducive for getting interceptions. If you're playing in man, it really takes an exceptional play to get an interception when you're a cornerback. So I think that's probably the one big knock on him, is that his ability to maybe track the ball as well as others behind him, and then converting that coverage into turnovers is going to be something he'll need to definitely improve on in Washington.
There have been, between like Dunlap and a few other guys coming out of there, it sounds like there were some people that had a hard time playing there the last couple of years because of all the losing and whatever. How did he handle all that, do you think?
I think he handled that pretty well, to be honest. I think there is a lot to be said for maybe the struggle to adapt to what Lou Anarumo was wanting to do over these last couple of years. Whether it was, the 3-4 scheme that Lou was trying to put in without really having the players to do so, or, they did a lot of exotic stuff on the back end. Like you said, last year, they've given up TDs on inverted cover 2, really been trying to play some exotic bluffs, exotic looks, really wanted to kind of keep teams on their toes. And I thought they were at their best at the end of last season when they really simplified things. And Jesse Bates, their safety, said that as well. So I think that not as much losing. I mean, that obviously plays a part in it, but I think by and large, it's really just adapting to a new scheme. And you got to remember that they've had a couple different coordinators,
right?
3 years. I mean, last year, Marvin Lewis's tenure, they fired the defensive coordinator in the middle of the year in Terrell Austin. Marvin took over, and then Lou Anarumo has been the coordinator for 2 years, and this is his first full-time coordinator job as well. So I think that's been a component as to why this defense struggled as well. They've been just trying to find a way to kind of get the right feel and mesh under Anarumo. They started to look like they did at the end of 2020, but I think there's definitely been some frustration that things haven't gone the way that people would have hoped the last couple of years.
And he, I heard he's a pretty quiet guy in the locker room. How is he in there, just like with teammates and all that? Like, what kind of guy is he?
Yeah, he's definitely a pretty quiet guy. He doesn't really talk a whole lot. Keeps to himself. And one thing that we talked about him going into the 2020 season is that I think after he had that rough 2019 where he was playing injured, I think he talked to his mom and he's like, I just want to go out, and she said, just go out and have some fun, play football and enjoy it. And you started to see that a little bit more. He's definitely a pretty happy guy. Really, he's done really well for himself when you look at his background and where he's came out of. He played football in Houston, and there's a lot of really great programs. He didn't really go to one. He went to one of the inner city schools that really didn't have a ton of background. One that really isn't successful in Wheatley. Obviously he was one of the big fun facts with him is that he was there at the same time as Xavier Howard, which is always fascinating. And then he went to Houston, which also isn't known for pumping out first-round picks. And he ended up, making it out of there to be a first-round pick and has shown why over the years when he's been on the field and when he's been playing well. So I think last year you saw, if you're a Washington fan looking for what you might get out of him, I think you're hoping that what you saw in 2020 in a better defense as well should be very encouraging, especially when it looked like, he was really finding his groove. You could really see him playing with confidence. He was enjoying himself out there, and that always leads to great production. And I think that especially now in a new home, in a new city, on a new team, I think he's going to find himself in a good situation.
And I think that pass rush, he's going to enjoy having that too, because any corner does, and that will be a key to anybody's game. Ben, that's great insight, and I appreciate your time. I think people are excited to see what he can do for this defense, and we go from there. So I appreciate you joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Sean.
Support for this podcast comes from WGU. Do you want a more skilled and effective workforce? Do you want to build loyalty and increase employee retention? A partnership with Western Governors University could be exactly what you need. Over 300 organizations nationwide already count on WGU for valuable education benefits that lead to better prepared and more capable workers. With more than 60 accredited bachelor's and master's programs to choose from, and shorter credential programs coming soon, WGU has long been a leader in making quality higher education more accessible. Flexible online learning is the key. Students can fit schooling around their existing schedules and even complete courses and degrees sooner than planned. WGU makes earning a respected degree possible with just a computer and an internet connection. Partner with WGU today to make a smart investment in your company's and employees' future. Learn more at wgu.edu/partnerships. That's wgu.edu/partnerships.
That's it for this episode. Thanks to David and Ben for joining me. Hope you enjoyed their insight, and thank you, as always, for listening. I'll be back with another episode Sunday night or Monday morning. I don't think there's going to be a need for any more bonus podcasts for a while. You never know. Regardless, talk to you next time.